Okay, happy Easter. Happy Easter. So today we hear in our gospel passage, Jesus says, okay, so 7 times in John's gospel, Jesus makes an I am statement. Now for those of us who know the biblical narrative, the word I am within itself is pretty powerful. In fact, in our Jewish tradition, the word I am literally is the name of God. So when Jesus 7 times declares I am, and then he continues by explaining how he is I am. He gives us some sort of tangible image of how he is God and how he is revealing himself as God. A lot of these 7 I am statements are very, very, very common to us. In fact, we sing them on a regular basis. So I thought on this Easter Sunday morning it would be a great way for us to start. So turn to 784. The majority of these, for a lot of these, you don't even need to turn to your hymnal because you have them memorized. So this is 784. We have been told, so please sing along with me. We have been told, we've seen his face and heard his voice, alive in our hearts. Live in my love with all your heart, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Verse 1. I am the vine, you are the branches, and all who live in me will bear great fruit. So who is God? I am the, you are the, and of course that's our verse today. We're going to talk a lot about that. 945, next to, we would know most commonly, if you've been to a funeral in the Catholic Church for like the past 40 years, you have this song memorized. So here we go. I am the bread of life. You who come to me shall not hunger, and who believe in me shall not thirst. No one can come to me unless the Father beckons. Who is Jesus? Jesus is. And what does the verse then proclaim? So if we eat the flesh and the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, what happens to us? And I will raise you up. Raise your hand if you want to go to hell. Let me ask that question. Raise your hand if you want to go to hell. Good, no one has their hand up. What do you want to do? You want to be raised up. What do you have to do if you want to be raised up? You have to eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood. You need the bread of life. Verse 4. I am the resurrection, I am the life. If you believe in me, even though you die, you shall live forever. What do we have over here on the left side of our church? An empty tomb. Why? Because Jesus rose from the dead. If we believe in Jesus, we believe that our tomb will also one day be empty. 402, one of my favorite songs. We sang this just last weekend. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, and so we sing, like a shepherd he feeds his flock and gathers the lambs in his arms, holding them carefully close to his heart, leading them home. This is like the best of Catholic hymns. Here we go. 724. It's really interesting if you go through the songs that we sing. There's actually very few songs about how Jesus is the light. There's a lot of more songs about how we are the light. Maybe something to think about. What does it mean that there's more songs about us? We sing more songs about ourselves and we sing songs about Jesus being the light. Just something very interesting to think about. Here we go. Verse 3. I heard the voice of Jesus say, I am this dark world's light. Look unto me, your morn shall rise, and all your day be bright. So So Jesus is the light of the world. We live in darkness. If you don't think that our world is dark, we aren't living in the same world. Christ is the light. Christ gives reason and purpose and meaning to life. That's why we need Christ. And through our relationship with Christ, we become light. But it is Christ who is the light. So even when we talk about the light that we have is not our own. The light that we have is Christ's light within us. 9:16. This is verses 3, 4, and 5. We're not going to sing all verses of 3, 4, and 5. But you'll see stacked up in this song that Jesus is the bread, he's the vine, he's the way, the truth, and the life. I receive the living God, and my heart is full of joy. I receive the living God, and my heart is full of joy. Verse 3, Jesus says, I am the way, and my path is straight and true. Okay, got it? Good. So, if you want to make $1 million, just so you know, write a song about how Jesus is the door because there are none. Seriously. This could be your one-hit wonder. 7 times in John's Gospel, Jesus says, I am. And then he helps us to understand who he is as God by giving these powerful images. I'm just going to tell you, if you ever need something to pray about, meditate about, you got 7 right here. 7 profound ways that God reveals himself to us, but also 7 profound ways that we are called to meditate upon who God is and our relationship with him. So, gentlemen, you can head back to your seats. We're going to focus today, of course, because it's our biblical passage, on Jesus who says, I am the vine. As I myself was reflecting and praying about these verses this past week, I found something very peculiar about Jesus who says, I am the vine. And it might be because of the case that last week we were focusing on Jesus the good shepherd. If you think of a shepherd's life is active. A shepherd's life involves movement. And a shepherd's life involves a lot of noise. Jesus himself talks about his voice being heard by the sheep. And you can only imagine being a shepherd where you're constantly hearing the noise of your sheep. Sheep themselves who are communicating to each other or communicating to God, giving birth, dying, in fear of wolves, and the chatter among the community of shepherds. What I find very profound about Jesus saying, I am the vine and you are the branches, is that it's absolute silence. There is absolutely no noise in the growing of a vine and its branches. It grows in utter silence. And if we think about our relationship with God grows, most importantly, in silence. In fact, if we look at all of nature, nature grows in silence. Trees grow in silence. Babies in the womb grow in silence. Jesus says, I remain in you, and you remain in me. And like an infant in the womb, we are called to remain in God, which demands silence. Branches that grow on a vine bear fruit. I want to make the bold statement this morning that it's impossible for us to bear fruit as Christians without silence in our lives. I know that I've preached before on silence and the importance of us taking time for silence, but I don't think I could ever do it enough. committed, intentional silence in our lives is essential. Now, there's tremendous benefits to silence. I can sell silence as a total atheist. Raise your hand if you have high blood pressure. You want to lower your blood pressure? Intentional silence. Raise your hand if you sometimes get sick. What boosts your immune system? Intentional daily silence. Raise your hand if you wish your husband or your wife or your children were just a little bit smarter. The one way to stimulate brain growth? Silence. Raise your hand if your life is sometimes a little stressful. Number one way to decrease stress? Silence. Want to be more creative? Silence. Want to improve your memory? Silence. Struggle with insomnia and you want to fight insomnia? Number one thing to do? Spend time during the day in silence. Should probably stop drinking so much caffeine as well, but nonetheless, insomnia is fought through silence. Now that's all from a world point of view. As your priest, as your pastor, silence is the number one way to foster a better relationship with God. Because in a very true sense, we enter into the silence of a vine and its branches that bear fruit. Raise your hand if you can humbly admit the fact that you need to grow in a deeper relationship with God. Then what is absolutely necessary in our lives? Silence. And it has to be intentional, committed silence, where we become intimately in union with our God, who grows his branches and bears fruit in silence. I'm reading a book right now called Silence by Cardinal Sarah. He's one of my favorite prelates or bishops and cardinals in the church. He's from Africa. He's one of the reasons why we actually celebrate Mass ad Orientem. And he's written a book called Silence, The Power of Silence. And the little subtitle is this: The Power of Silence Against the Dictatorship of Noise. Our world is a dictatorship of noise. From the moment you wake up in the morning until the moment you go to bed at night, the vast majority of our lives are controlled and dominated by noise. Whether it be electronic noise from the radio, the internet, or your iPod, or your car radio, or whether it be the noise of other people, the noise of machines, our world is controlled by keeping us occupied, busy, and never spending time in silence. We avoid silence, we're scared of silence, and yet, just like a vine with its branches, our life with Christ demands silence. And we will not bear fruit if there is not intentional silence in our life. I have a story out of this book that I'd like to read. It's a story about an Italian priest. His name is Father Angelico. It's a perfect name for a priest. And he had a great desire to meet Mother Teresa. I have a first-class relic of Mother Teresa here on the altar. It's 5 pieces of her hair. So she's with us here today as well. Father Angelico was a newly ordained priest in the early 1970s. And he very much so wanted to meet Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa had begun her great work of missionary, of service to the poorest of the poor in Calcutta, India. People were fascinated by her way of life. And Father Angelico had decided that he was going to go to Calcutta to visit Mother Teresa at the very beginning of his priesthood. I'm going to read this story. I asked the altar boys before we started Mass today whether I should read the story with accents or not accents, and they voted for me to use some accents, so here we go. This is in the words of Father Angelico. I telephoned the General House of the Missionaries of Charity so as to be able to meet with Mother Teresa. But the answer on the phone was categorical. It is not possible to meet with Mother. Her engagements do not allow it. The following day, I bought a plane ticket, and I flew to Calcutta anyway. The sister who came to the door of the Mother House opened it and very politely asked me, "What do you want?" I would just like to meet Mother Teresa for a few moments. Surprised, the sister replied, "I am sorry. She is very busy. It is not possible." I didn't budge. Sister quickly came to understand that I was not going to leave Calcutta without having met Mother Teresa. The sister went away for a few moments and then came back in the company of Mother Teresa. I was startled and speechless. Mother brought me inside and had me sit down in a little room right next to the chapel. Meanwhile, I had recovered a bit and managed to say, "Mother, I am a very young priest. I'm taking my baby steps. I came here to ask you to accompany me with your prayers." Mother looked tenderly and kindly at me, and then smiling, she replied, "I always pray for priests. I will pray for you also." She then gave me a miraculous medal of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and she put it in my hands. And she asked me, "For how much time do you pray each day?" I was astonished and a little embarrassed. Then gathering my thoughts, I replied, "Mother, I am a priest. I celebrate a Mass every day, and I pray my breviary every day, and I also pray a rosary." Mother Teresa, with her rough hands, clasped the rosary that hung from the belt around her waist. She then fixed on me her eyes, which were filled with light and love, and said, "It is not enough, my son. It is not enough, because love cannot be reduced to the indispensable minimum. Love demands the maximum. Love demands the maximum." I didn't understand Mother Teresa's words right away, and as though to justify myself, I replied, "Mother, I expected you instead to question me, what acts of charity do you do? How do you serve the poor?" Suddenly, Mother Teresa's face became very serious, and she said with a stern tone of voice, "Do not think that I could practice charity if I did not ask Jesus every day to fill my heart with his love. Do you think that I could go through the streets looking for the poor if Jesus did not communicate the fire of his charity into my heart?" I then felt very small. I looked at Mother Teresa with profound admiration and the sincere desire to enter into the mystery of her soul, which so filled me with the presence of God. Enunciating each word, she added, "Read the Gospels attentively, and you will see that Jesus sacrificed even charity for prayer. And do you know why? To teach us that without God, you are too poor to help the poor. Without God, you are too poor to help the poor." At that time in the 1970s, we saw many priests and many religious sisters abandoning prayer in order to immerse themselves, as they said, in social work. Mother Teresa's words seemed to me like a ray of sunshine, and I repeated them slowly in my heart of hearts. Without God, we are too poor to help the poor. I truly believe that we are called in a very real and substantial way to be like the vine and branch that we hear in today's gospel passage that bears tremendous fruit. And yet I would be a fool and a bad priest and a terrible pastor to say that we can bear fruit without first and foremost entering into intimacy and communion with our Lord, to be infused with God's love as a branch receives its life from the vine. If we do not, first and foremost, be people of intentional silence and intentional, regular, committed prayer. If we want to be branches that bear fruit, if you want to be more generous, more loving, more charitable to your wife, to your husband, to your children, to your neighbor, to your enemies, to the poor, to the outcasts, to those who live in the fringes of society and the world, which is what we're called to do as Christians, we have to grow in silence with the Lord. Last week, when speaking about the Good Shepherd, I spoke about the difference between success and service. And that we are called to measure ourselves not on our successes, but on how generous we are, how truly radical we are in our service to those in need. In Mother Teresa's words, to the poor. As we've been saying since this past Christmas, our best ability is what? And so a great question is, do we truly make ourselves available to God in silence? Do we truly make ourselves available to God in silence? If you're like me, you often make little commitments to God all the time, and then you don't follow through with them. You have a desire or a commitment to pray more, or to read the Bible, or to read a good book, and we fail at it. Some of you might recall that 2 years ago on Father's Day, I made a public commitment to spend 2 hours every single day in silent prayer in front of the Blessed Sacrament. I can tell you that in the past 2 years, that has been the biggest game changer in my life as a priest. As a priest, I'm required to celebrate Mass every day and to pray some prayers out of a book called the Breviary. 2 hours of prayer on top of that is not required, but I have found it to be one of the best things that I could ever do. And I will tell you, in the past probably about 6 months, that happening 7 days a week hasn't been happening. It happens about 4 days a week. And the other 3 I settle for just spending an hour with our Lord. And just like you, it's all the same excuses. I just need to answer those last few emails. I just need to get that stuff off my desk. I need to get that laundry done. I need to go to the store and get those things. I'll do it later today. I'll do it tonight before I go to bed. I'll find time. I don't really need to do 2 hours. I mean, other priests don't do 2 hours. I can just do 1 hour. That's all that I really need to do. I don't even need to do an hour. I mean, like, look what I'm doing. An excuse, an excuse, an excuse. And I can tell you that I find in my own life that the truth of Mother Teresa's statement is verified. That without God, we are too poor to give to the poor. Without silence, without prayer, we end up giving ourselves, which no one needs and no one wants. And yet when we all the more are intentionally consecrating ourselves in silent prayer, we can truly give God to other people.
We, like the branches on a vine, literally are one with God, and we bear fruit in abundance. And other people receive that fruit, and their lives are changed. Let's pray today that we, like a vine and a branch that grow in silence, will realize that we grow in silence. May we recommit today, myself included, to the silence, to the prayer that the Lord invites us to. And may we realize that with God, we are not poor. With God, we are rich. And we can give to the poor. Through silence and through God's grace, may it be so.